Awesome. Well, hello everyone. Good morning. My name is Marin. I am happy and grateful for the opportunity to be talking with you all. I'll go ahead and share my screen just because I did have some slides put together. But as I will introduce in this talk, I'm hoping that this is more of kind of an informal opportunity for some discussion between everyone. So I really only have about like 20 minutes maybe of things to share and to talk about, and then kind of hoping that beyond that, the rest of the hour can be a space to kind of talk and for me to learn from you guys and to get to hear all of your thoughts on this topic. So, with that, I'll kind of jump in. The kind of topic or theme that I wanted to kind of have the hour to discuss was this idea of living with uncertainty, particularly as it relates to some of the unknowns of 4-H and its progression. So that's what some of these slides will be talking about. But I wanted to first briefly introduce myself because I imagine that I'm probably a new face. I don't know if I've, met either of you or your families yet. So just to kind of provide some context as to how I got here and why I'm speaking with you today. I actually, in my undergrad career at Notre Dame, did a science and patient advocacy program, sort of didactic curriculum, where I was introduced to the Yaya Foundation and had the really incredible experience of getting to work with them on a project for the semester. And actually, for some context prior to that, when I was in high school, myself and my family went through our own kind of diagnosis of a rare disease and a genetic condition that kind of imbues a degree of uncertainty. Um, and so that was a really formative personal experience for me that I think has shaped a lot of my interests, both in rare disease and genetics, and kind of how people make meaning out of that in their lives. And so that is why I was really struck by my experience working with Yaya Group and was really excited to get to continue to work with them. I'm now currently at the University of Pennsylvania doing my training in genetic counseling. So I'm just about done with that master's program and hoping to continue to go on and work as a clinical genetic counselor. And with that, I think that profession in and of itself kind of ties really neatly into the work that the Yaya Foundation is doing for their patient community. A lot of the goals and hopes that I have for some of the patients and families that I get to speak to, I think the Yaya Foundation kind of continues in a lot of their work as they help families. So I was really thankful to get to continue to work with them in my graduate experience and have really enjoyed getting to continue to help on some of those advocacy topics. Which brings me to today. I think some of the observations that both my own personal experiences and sort of what I've learned from talking with different families is kind of this idea around genetic uncertainty. And I think it's a really interesting sort of paradox to think about sometimes. I think in a lot of ways, the medical community, genetics community presents genetics as this really great thing to provide answers to a lot of questions. I think people have symptoms where they don't quite know what's happening. And we offer genetics as a way to kind of find out that explanation, that reason why, maybe find the name for symptoms or a unifying diagnosis that can bring a lot of things together. Which I agree. I think those are really incredible, great pieces of information that genetics can provide. But I also think, on the other hand, having a genetic diagnosis or knowing of a particular condition also introduces a lot of uncertainty in individuals' experiences and kind of introduces new questions after we have maybe some answers. So I think I put some questions here as to common, things that I think I talk with families and hear about is a lot of these questions about what this might mean for the future, how things might look, what can you do, what are good next steps. And I think in a lot of genetic conditions, not just 4-H, I think those are things that the science and some of what we know about genetic conditions doesn't quite provide that answer. And I think hence introduces a lot of this uncertainty that then we, have to navigate and talk through with families. So I think I recognize that sort of interesting dynamic that comes along with genetics and a genetic diagnosis. I think both my own personal experiences and what I've learned from families, I kind of felt that this might be something that could be helpful to talk about. So that is my hope for today. I have sort of three sections that we'll be walking through in our discussion. Again, the first two are just some review of what research and literature I kind of did on this idea of uncertainty in rare disease, uncertainty, and 4-H specifically. But then largely, I'm hoping that some of this time can be, an opportunity to discuss and reflect on what your own experiences might be with some of the uncertainty you faced in your lived experience. And I think ultimately, I am by no means an expert on what this type of uncertainty is that you're navigating in your own lived experiences. And I'm hoping, both to learn from you and kind of have a space for you to hopefully hear from others about what this can be like. So ultimately, I think the my goal for today is to one, present some research and some literature to maybe recognize or validate your experiences. I think something that's really powerful about qualitative research in particular, which is some of the research that I'll be presenting, is that it pulls directly from the patient experience. So from, literature or from interviews, from focus studies, it's a type of research where I think you can hear directly from the patient voice. And at least myself, I think sometimes that can be quite meaningful or quite therapeutic from, both perspective as a patient myself and also as a genetic counselor who talks with families. I think reading about experiences that other people articulate and seeing yourself in them can be quite helpful. So, or at least kind of validating in that what you're not alone in what you feel. So, I think that's my goal with presenting some of this research qualitative work that has been done on this topic in both rare disease generally and also in 4-H. And then again, hoping to hear from your experiences and whether or not hearing about some of those other things resonates. So these are kind of the three things that I'll hope to talk about today. And of course, as I said, can be as informal as possible. So feel free to jump in if you have thoughts, if you have questions. So yeah, we'll start off with this first topic, which is kind of just a general overview on what kind of work and some background on the thinking that has been done on uncertainty and illness more broadly. Just to present kind of maybe some schema or some framework to maybe think about what you might have experienced in your own lived experience. So. Starting off with this paper, I thought they did a really quite succinct job of defining what uncertainty is. And they called it, this state of having imperfect or unknown information. And I thought that was really quite eloquent, and it also made me think about the fact that I think there's almost you could argue any aspect of science or medicine or really life in general. I think we always have imperfect information, and we always have information that's unknown. So I think framing it that way was really kind of helpful for me to think about, the other areas in life that you might not think about all the time, how even those places can be touched by uncertainty as defined in this way. And I'll circle back to this paper as well, but I thought I just wanted to provide their definition for you. And then actually, this paper also, I think, speaks to that topic a little bit. They define uncertainty broadly in illness. And I thought their quote here was also in some ways quite reassuring to hear like uncertainty is a central part of what it means to experience illness, not only for the person who experiences the illness themselves, but also for the people around them. So for their family, their friends, caregivers. I think for all of these people, I'm sure again, as you can reflect on your own experience, um, illness or experiencing a disease inherently in and of itself kind of imbues some degree of uncertainty. And you can imagine that for yourself, but also for, watching someone else experience those things. So I share these quotes not to, minimize any of the uncertainty that you might be facing, because I know, as I'll talk about in coming slides, I think facing a rare disease heightens a lot of the uncertainty that people have to face in their day-to-day life. But I think to some extent, having uncertainty be normalized as something that actually we all face in our day to day can maybe make some of the uncertainty you're feeling feel a little less isolating and a little less lonely and maybe a little bit more, as I said, normalized. So I'll circle back to, but I think that's a general theme that I'll come back to a couple of times in this presentation. And maybe thinking about the ways that you could have faced uncertainty in other areas of your life, not just in this particular condition, can sometimes be really helpful for people. So again, I thought this was, at least for me, a reassuring framing, and I'd love to hear your thoughts at the end as to whether or not it's helpful to think about uncertainty as something that touches all of us. Okay. And then the next thing that I wanted to present is a little bit more on how people have defined uncertainty in health in general. So this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but it's actually quite interesting as I was reading. I think you know what uncertainty means, and then you start reading what people write about it, and they come up with a million different ways to define it and a million different ways to categorize it and sort it. So I thought it was helpful to present some of that just because I think maybe, again, it can provide some framework for you to maybe think about what bucket some of the uncertainty you're facing might fall into. So I wanted to present some of the work that this paper and this group did, where they essentially created a what they call a conceptual taxonomy, sort of structuring or organizing how you might think about uncertainty, or when we say uncertainty, what does that mean? So the first kind of grouping or ordering that they created under this umbrella term of uncertainty, they defined as sort of sources of uncertainty. So where does that come from in and of itself? I think in one aspect you can think of uncertainty as coming from something being relating to probability. So knowing that something is possible, but not knowing for certain whether or not it will happen. So you know you have like a 60% chance of XYZ happening. That statement in and of itself kind of encapsulates uncertainty because there's not, a guarantee of something happening. And I think that's, of course, something that I can imagine is relevant to a lot of your experiences, knowing that there's all these symptoms that coalesce into what this diagnosis means, but none of those symptoms are guaranteed. There's always some degree of probability in them. So that's one way of thinking about uncertainty. Another way they define as ambiguity. This kind of relates more to the facet of having limited information or limited knowledge about certain things. And I again think that that is likely reflected in some of your experiences, just because, especially with genetic conditions, we're learning a lot about how progression looks, what it can look like for some people, for others, what the range of spectrum of a condition might be. And, as we all know, the future in general is always to some degree ambiguous. So that is one I imagine probably is predominant in a lot of your experiences. And then the last way that they define uncertainty is using this term complexity. And they use this more to point out that sometimes individuals experience uncertainty when the sort of topic that they're facing has a lot of nuance or complexity. So it can kind of incorporate these ideas of both probability and ambiguity and combine those to say that sometimes the fact that topics might be difficult or nuanced to understand can, in and of itself, kind of present uncertainty for people experiencing them. So I think all three of those things are ways that you can think about uncertainty, perhaps in your experience. And then the second taxonomy this paper presented on was what are some of the issues or topics then within those groupings of uncertainty that people might kind of face in their experiences. They use sort of three broad categories. So the first being scientific uncertainty. So as I'm sure you can imagine, there's a lot of ambiguity in kind of what we know about conditions. People face uncertainty in finding a diagnosis, that period of an odyssey where they don't have clear answers for what might be happening. Prognosis is one I imagine we'll be talking about a lot today, not having clear cut answers on how something might move forward, thinking about the future. Also, treatment. So, facing a condition that has little information on treatment or what you can do for management also kind of creates a degree of uncertainty. Um, Thinking to another category, they kind of lay out practical concerns as also being an area where families encounter uncertainty. So, thinking about how they're going to go about receiving care for someone financially, what does that look like? Who is the best person or best specialist to be seeing? All of those are questions that people face and kind of can cast uncertainty onto their medical experience. And then the last category they define is personal uncertainty. So, both the psychosocial aspect of, what does this mean for my family? What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my child? And then the existential nature of, how might the future pan out? What does that look like? Um, so I know those are very sort of broad, non-specific terms. And I thought what was really helpful is that this next paper that I present will present actually did a really great job of providing concrete examples of what that can look like for individuals navigating a rare disease. So hopefully that will clarify if there are questions about what this taxonomy might mean. This next paper will clarify kind of how you might apply that or to sort of organize or orient your own uncertainty that you faced in your experience. Um, so this paper titled Uncertainties of Healthcare Professionals and Informal Caregivers in Rare Diseases was a systematic review. So they kind of went through the literature research that currently exists on this topic of uncertainty and rare diseases quite broadly, and reviewed kind of what those papers said and organized with the topics of those papers and what they were discussing as it relates to uncertainty within this sort of category of taxonomy that I just kind of walked through. So um, they kind of provide those topical examples of how you might think about some of these categories applying to your experience. So I alluded to some of those in the previous slide, but you can see here they kind of list under the scientific categories I laid out, specifically diagnostic odysseys, which are really quite common in rare diseases, or like I mentioned, the lack of information or knowledge on treatment being something that is quite common for individuals with rare disease. Um, so again, just hoping that this kind of maybe anchors what I was just sharing to more specific examples. I also think that this paper and this example um, kind of emphasizes that, as I mentioned, rare disease is something that really primes families to face uncertainty, largely because of what we're still learning about them and because we do have such a knowledge gap in a lot of these conditions. And so I say that just to kind of share that I think across rare diseases specifically, this is, quite this is a common sort of thing to talk about with families is that it is a diagnosis that comes with a lot of uncertainty. And I think you can see a lot of similarities agnostic of the condition that we're talking about in some of the different sort of topics that come up when we think about uncertainty in this way. So um, again, happy to kind of hear your thoughts at the end as to whether you think some of these topics represent places where you might have felt uncertainty in your own lived experience. The other thing that I wanted to present from this paper was I thought they did a really, great and helpful job of identifying a lot of the psychosocial or emotional impacts of what it means to actually face this uncertainty in the experience. So I pulled out some of the words that they used and kind of pulled out from their review of the literature, common sort of feelings or emotions that come along or sort of follow this experience of uncertainty. So you can see here things like anxiety, fear, isolation was one that came out a lot, grief, confusion, a sense of helplessness or disempowerment. These are all things that I think naturally follow the experience of kind of this chronic uncertainty or maybe even this amplified uncertainty that comes with a rare disease experience. So again, I am of the mind that being able to read about what other people experience and see yourself in those reflections is maybe something that is helpful or um, meaningful to know that you're not the only one facing these things. So I pulled out these words just to share that I think if you see yourself in any of them, I think that's incredibly normal and valid and something that I think I've seen across my readings of this experience. So and again, these are some words and topics and sort of emotions that I'll circle back to as I review some of the qualitative work done in this sort of space. Then the last thing that I wanted to talk about more broadly about uncertainty before I get into some of those qualitative studies was circling back to this first paper that I pulled the original definition that I presented to you about, just because I thought it framed uncertainty in a way that I think I don't see it framed that often, and I thought it was really um, interesting to think about it this way. So this paper was actually an ethical almost debate, so an ethical engagement with this idea of uncertainty, particularly in the way that it relates to genetic counselors or genetic providers communicating it to families. And their kind of key argument was that um, generally, I think in medicine and in healthcare, there's this ideology of uncertainty reduction, this sense that like we should be doing as much as we can to reduce uncertainty because uncertainty is this inherently bad thing. But where that idea or sort of that villainization of uncertainty becomes challenging in their argument is that in the setting of genomic medicine, I argue in the setting kind of more broadly of rare disease, uncertainty is almost an unavoidable or sort of central aspect of the experience. I think we can all admit there's so much we don't know about genetics and about rare disease that I think, at least in this moment in time, there is always going to be some aspect of uncertainty in the experience. And so I think then gravitating towards that ideology wherein we're doing everything we can to say that uncertainty is this really bad thing and we should be trying to reduce it as much as possible kind of puts families in a really uncomfortable position because it's, a little bit impossible to completely do that. And so this ethical debate or argument is that we should actually be sort of embracing uncertainty in some ways and helping families find ways to adapt to it more, as opposed to kind of being in this maladapted state of constantly thinking that experiencing uncertainty is bad. I pulled out this quote that they shared here to just highlight that their argument that uncertainty is actually something more complex than just this sort of demonized bad thing. And they wrote here, it can be actually a door to hope. It can be an opportunity or a challenge or even a threat. So I think again, like not invalidating that uncertainty is really uncomfortable and that it brings along all of those emotions that I just presented on that previous slide, but also that sometimes it can be seen as a good thing, that there's still a number of different outcomes that are possible to experience, that there's hope for XYZ to still happen. So I think I found this argument to be really compelling that maybe reshaping or reframing how we think about uncertainty and moving away from this idea that it's, inherently a bad thing, more towards this kind of value neutral position related to it could be helpful for some people. So they also suggest sort of this process for how to think about coping with uncertainty. So for one, um, the kind of necessary step is in appraising what uncertainty you are experiencing. So I think that's a little bit of why I presented those initial schemas of how to maybe think or organize your thinking around uncertainty, because such an important part of adapting to it is understanding where it's coming from, what its form is, and how you're sort of valuing that uncertainty in your life. So kind of thinking of whether or not it's an uncertainty that is reducible or not, whether it's something that's you feel negative towards or maybe positive towards or neutral towards, and kind of being able to understand where it's coming from and how you feel about it is the first sort of kind of act towards adaptation. Um, and then they also kind of suggest, as I mentioned, this stage of adaptation, adjusting to uncertainty, kind of hinging on knowing where it's coming from, and then also reframing it again from something that is intuitively negative to something that is more manageable and more value neutral. So again, I present this just because I think it was not a way that you hear uncertainty being talked about a lot, but I thought a really compelling way to maybe think about it or reframe it. So with that, that's kind of the end of the first piece that I wanted to present. And then the second part I wanted to walk through was just presenting a couple of papers that did qualitative research on uncertainty. And the first one will be in rare disease more broadly, and the second one is specifically in 4-H. I wanted to kind of leave a little bit of a note here, or maybe a plug for qualitative research, because I was actually introduced to it as a part of my master's training, and am doing a qualitative study for my research thesis. And it's not something that I had heard about before, even in my undergraduate career, but again, something that I think has been really meaningful to my own personal sort of meaning making out of my personal experiences, and also to how I think about, how I talk to patients. Um, and I think it's because, again, it pulls directly from patient experience. So I think there's sort of a way that you can think about seeing yourself in these experiences and maybe that being something that's therapeutic for you. So again, I don't present these to say that these are the only ways to experience uncertainty in your journey or that these are like the only perspectives that exist. I think that's what's really beautiful about qualitative work is that there's always this acknowledgement that there are other ways that there are unlimited number of ways to have experiences in these things. And the goal is really just to present those nuances as much as possible and provide sort of a voice for the patient in the literature. So yeah, that's what I hope kind of walking through or talking through some of these studies will do is just to kind of highlight what some of the voices are that exist and then maybe have that be a launching point for you all to share a little bit more. Um, Okay, so with that, the first study that I wanted to present is titled I Don't Grieve as Much as I Used to. And this was a qualitative study with parents who had a rare and undiagnosed condition and kind of what their experiences were of navigating grief in the context of uncertainty. So this study was an interview study, like I mentioned, so qualitative research. They talked to 24 parent or caregivers of children with either, a rare or undiagnosed condition. And in this work, their sort of central theme that they pulled from their analysis was they titled Navigating Grief in the Context of Uncertainty. So their key kind of thing or analysis that they pulled out was really talking about that this diagnosis was sort of defined or the experience was defined by grief. And so as you can imagine, parents are experiencing the loss of imagined futures, of a reality that might deviate from an envisioned path. And in genetic counseling, we talk a lot about this concept of chronic sorrow or chronic grief, where with your journey, you're constantly kind of coming to terms with a new loss or a new change or a new development that kind of brings you to the cyclical sort of process of needing to cope with that and grieve those losses. So I think that's a really poignant description, I imagine, of some experiences in that, you know, while you are maybe anticipating all these losses, that comes with having to grieve and cope with those losses. And what I thought was an interesting twist that they added to that sort of description was that the idea of uncertainty actually complicates that grieving process for families. So again, while they're kind of having to come to terms with all these losses, there's a sort of lacking a clear resolution point, especially within the context of an uncertain prognosis. And I think that in and of itself makes the grief even more complicated to deal with. So I thought it was a really beautiful way to articulate what the added sort of psychosocial implications may be of an uncertain prognosis or progression, and that I think it adds another layer of coping and grief that it's necessary for families to come to terms with. Um, I also wanted to pull out from this paper some of the things that the participants mentioned, helped them in their process of grieving and of coping with some of this uncertain prognosis. One thing that a participant talked about frequently was this idea of time, and that really it just took time for them to learn how to live with some of the grief that they were facing, and that, really coming to terms with it was something that didn't happen in any single moment or because of any single thing, but rather something that was a continual process over time. Um, People also talked a lot about peer support groups being helpful. So having this connection with other people who understand the type of uncertainty that you're facing in life as something that was really, meaningful and useful. And then people also pointed to in this interview study towards mental health support. So how therapists and prioritizing their own mental health was something that was really important as they're kind of facing this continual chronic grief. So I'll circle back to kind of some of those points about what was useful for them in some takeaways, but to move on to the next interview study. So this one specifically was in families with polar 3 related leukodystrophy. And so that was an interview study with 24 parents and then actually 9 siblings of individuals with polar 3 leukodystrophy and really kind of collecting their experience on how this diagnosis impacts other family members. I put also this study at the top here. I wanted to emphasize that, again, I think as I've shared a number of times, I really am a big proponent of the ways that reading qualitative research can be therapeutic for families. And I wanted to emphasize that I'm going to be talking about the theme around uncertainty that this paper pulled out, but I think this paper did so much more than that and kind of spoke to probably what I imagine is a lot of your own other kind of varied aspects of the experience. So if you're interested in kind of are of a like mind to mine and think this might be helpful, I wanted to share that I'm not talking about all of what the paper highlighted, and it might be nice to kind of read what some of the other things were that they shared in their findings. But for the sake of conversation today, I just wanted to pull out one of their themes, which was around parental experiences, and they titled their theme "Fear of the Unknown." Their synthesis I put here in kind of quotations, and they emphasize, I'm sure as you all can imagine, maybe was the impetus of some of today's talk was that this unknown is what is a really challenging part of the disease experience. So here they called it the most difficult part, and that the absence of answers or having any predictions is difficult and mind-consuming. And you can see a lot of the emotions here that I pulled from some of the more broad research kind of being reflected as well in your in the experiences reported in this paper. So worry being something that comes up a lot, grief, echoing this first paper. You can see here in the next line, parents feeling overwhelmed in this uncertainty and also isolated in this uncertainty. So again, echoing a lot of, I think, the psychosocial implications that some of these other research papers have talked about. I wanted to also pull out an excerpt that they included in the paper just because, again, I think it was a really great, eloquent way of articulating some of these ideas that I'm imagine is common to a lot of people's experiences. So this participant talked about the challenges with worrying about time and how the concept of time kind of presents a lot of uncertainty. Um, so, yes, and again, I think this quote pulls out some of those, if we think back to that word bubble, some of those common psychosocial emotions that across the literature we see individuals talking about when it comes to uncertainty. So here, the unknown being something that's scary and anxiety provoking. Um, okay, and then I also wanted to pull out that this study talked to siblings. I think that's something that's really interesting that not a lot of studies on families do as much, but I think we can all recognize that this is a diagnosis that impacts the broader family system. So the quote that I pulled out from their findings here talked about how even for siblings, they shared similar emotional reactions and similar uncertainties that were described by the parents, particularly older siblings, discussed their fear as well of the unknown and kind of the uncertainty around their siblings' future. So, just to recognize again, I think that this is something that it touches not just the person with the condition, but everyone kind of in the family system. I also wanted to pull out some of the things in this study that people reported as being helpful. So, again, this topic or idea of kind of prioritizing parental self-help came out in some of the discussion. So, they didn't specifically mention here, like, mental health therapy or that the first paper mentioned, but I think they talked about kind of the paradoxical nature of how it's really difficult when you're a caregiver to prioritize your own well-being, but also hearing participants talk about that when they did that and did prioritize self-help, that kind of improved their experience around facing some of this uncertainty. And then again, echoing what the previous paper discussed, a lot of people discussed what the comfort was that they found in having community. Again, kind of having people who know what it's like to face a lot of this uncertainty. Um, so yeah, that was this paper. And then the last paper I wanted to present, again, is specific to the 4-H community. It was actually done with the same group, and I imagine the same cohort of interviews that the previous paper was done on. And this work more so explored themes related to experiences within the healthcare system. But I think here also speaks to, if we think back to that taxonomy, maybe some of the experiences within the healthcare system that reflect the uncertainty when it comes to both the scientific and the practical aspects of receiving care. So, one of the themes that they pulled out was how families encounter this limited knowledge or limited support that they perceive in kind of the care that they're getting. And I think, again, that reflects some of the uncertainty and information that both, the healthcare system in general has about 4-H. So, again, this participant here talks about feeling the need of needing more support and feeling like there's no information to kind of help them. So while not explicitly using the words uncertainty, I think even this paper kind of underscores how that is a thread that kind of is common to all aspects of the lived experience of this condition. Um, so I wanted to sort of synthesize some takeaways that I felt reading on some of the um, literature or research on uncertainty, at least that I was struck by. So first, as I mentioned in the first section, I think realizing that uncertainty is common is something that people broadly across rare disease and even others within the 4-H community face. And I think I say that again, as I mentioned, not to minimize and say that these other uncertainties that other people face are exactly the same or equate to some of the uncertainty you feel here, but more so to say that it is something that a lot of people face and navigate, and so you're not alone. I think isolation was a big word that came out of some of this qualitative work that I was reading, and I think emphasizing or in some ways normalizing that uncertainty is something that a lot of people face can maybe help with that feeling of isolation or feeling alone. I'll say that a strategy that I'm kind of learning as in genetic counseling is asking families when they are kind of encountering this acute uncertainty in their experiences, is to ask them to think about another time in their life where they may have encountered uncertainty and kind of ask them how they coped or navigated that experience. And again, I don't think the goal of that question is to say that this type of uncertainty that you're facing in this experience is exactly the same or the same acuity as it might be in somewhere else in your life. But I think more to point out that this is something that we all kind of face throughout our lives and maybe implicitly have gathered strategies to navigate. And I think it's really both reassuring and maybe kind of empowering to know that there are other places or times in your life that you already have navigated uncertainty and already have coped with that or managed with that. And I think thinking towards ways that those tools that you've implicitly developed in those experiences that you may not have even thought about or really given much attention to could be helpful towards the uncertainty you're facing in this situation. So again, I think a tool that you can either take or leave, but I think sometimes is helpful for people to think through. The other takeaway I wanted to share is that uncertainty is really difficult, is really hard, and I think that's something that I hope came through in sharing what some of other people's experiences with it is that it does come with all these implications of anxiety and fear and isolation and sadness, and I think all of those things are valid. And I think it's important to recognize that that is kind of the experience that is to be had with uncertainty. I think, again, I wanting to use this talk to provide a space just to recognize that that is um, what comes with uncertainty and that that is truly, truly, really hard and difficult. Um, the last thing I wanted to pull out just from some of my readings was that I think uncertainty can be met with some strategies. So pulling, kind of synthesizing what those qualitative studies showed, I think some people talked about peer support being really helpful, prioritizing mental health support being really helpful, and even just kind of taking time to navigate that uncertainty. I wanted here to also insert a little bit of insight from my research that I've been doing for my master's thesis, kind of on the topic of peer support, because I am working or talking, I did an interview study with individuals who have a neuromuscular diagnosis. So they were primarily adults, but again, kind of facing a some degree of uncertainty in what progression might look like for them. And a lot of my questions were centered around like, how do you experience that within your family and within other communities? And something that I found a lot of people saying was that, it's really helpful to have these communities to turn to, have other people who have these experiences to kind of get insight, to get knowledge, to kind of see what it might look like down the road, that type of thing. But also recognizing that sometimes that can feel really scary to see kind of how progression might look for someone else or to see what someone who is older than you might look like with this condition. And I think something that was helpful that a lot of these people shared was that um, there's almost this sense of it being useful to see those experiences, but then also recognize that your own experience doesn't have to mirror others and that you can kind of forge your own path in certain ways. So I just wanted to share that insight because I think peer support can also be something that comes with a bit of this double-edged sword where it's very useful, but then it can also bring new fears and new kind of uncertainties in some way. Um, and I think that that was something that was really revolutionary for me to hear from these people was that sometimes recognizing that you can kind of have your own trajectory is something that's really meaningful. So just a tidbit on that. But yes, I also wanted to emphasize with the strategies that it is really individual and there's not a right or wrong approach. It's something that can be cyclical, as I mentioned in some of those other papers that shared. Um, it's not something that is kind of set in stone, and once you figure it out, it's done. But I think, as I shared, that's something that I am hoping to hear a little bit more from you all and your own experiences, kind of what you have found helpful, and kind of learn from you all. That's all I had to share. I think this last, now that we have about, it seems, 20 minutes in the hour, just to kind of leave for discussion with really the experts on this subject, which are you all who have the experience. So I added some questions here to maybe guide any discussion or thoughts. But really, from my perspective, I wanted this to be a space for anyone to share about how you think about uncertainty in your life, what it feels like for you, whether there's any really useful strategies that you've encountered. And maybe for my own interest, I'm curious whether you all have felt like some of the qualitative work speaks to your experiences or not, just because I think it's super interesting. So I'll stop sharing there. I think that's all that I had in the way of slides. And again, just wanted to wrap up by saying how thankful I am for have being given the opportunity to speak to you all, and I'm really excited to learn a little bit in our discussion. So um, that is all I have.
Thank you, Maren, and thank you for talking to us. Looks like Tommy has stepped off, but for a moment, but I was kind of wondering, maybe can I volunteer somebody in the group to
Go
to
for it.
perhaps um, talk a little bit about the questions that Maren asked, or has any of you something to add that you would like to say at this point? Sorry, Tommy, I didn't know. Yeah.
No, I changed rooms. Sorry.
Okay. No, yeah, yeah.
I'll just say, from a personal standpoint, this was probably one of the most needed discussions for our group on probably any of the topics we've covered. And I say that because it's so universal. And any family that I meet, especially the newly diagnosed, they need that crystal ball, me included. And with my daughter being older, the grief does get easier, except when it doesn't. And so it's very cyclical. And we all experience these same feelings within the group. And to validate that and discuss that, I think is priceless. So thank you very much for this. Um, I think we'll be revisiting this quite a few times. So wonderful presentation, Marion. Thank you.
Of course. Well, thank you for sharing those thoughts, Tammy. And yeah, just to echo what you shared, I think it's my goal was to kind of maybe provide a space to maybe speak to things that I imagine a lot of people are experiencing. And um, I think, I would love to hear from others kind of whether or not you resonated in any of those things. Because again, I think as you shared, it's something that's universal to, I imagine, all of your experiences, but I think universal to a lot of people who are getting a new diagnosis. So, yeah. Anyone else have any other thoughts or things that came up for them when from this talk?
I know I came on a little late and I do apologize, but um, just the uncertainty. You do go through those grieving, the what is it, the steps when you lose a loved one, because you realize you have as a parent the hopes and dreams of college or finding their purpose in life, and now it is finding just every day the everyday wins that they put together a sentence. It may have taken a full day, but they put together a sentence, or they smiled, they're excited. And we don't see the progression because we're living with our son every day. He is 20, he just turned 24. What hits the hardest are the people that haven't seen him for a while, and they saw him when he was performing on stage, musical theater with his sister, or running, playing outside, riding a bike. And when they see that, that's the hard part, because for us, we accept it every day. You're right. It's cyclical. Some days are good, some days are bad, but every day we have to, uplift him. It's when the outside world, they mean well, um, that they say things, and I'm learning how to navigate this uncertainty. The mama bear comes out at me, and I realize they don't know, and I have to educate, but it's hard because I automatically say if they say something derogatory, even though they don't think it is, but it is. So that's hard. With the siblings, I thought that was very interesting. He has two older sisters. The oldest one constantly, um, it has affected her more. Because she feels maybe she should come home. She lives in DC. She should come home and take care of him, because we're both working still. We're not of the age to retire just yet. We're going through personal care attendants. This next step, he's 90% in a wheelchair now. So that's the hardest for a sibling, because I know we keep telling her, just go live your life until there's going to be a time. We know. And that's the hard part, is the uncertainty. When is we, it's the lost. Why am I crying? Oh my God. It's the, maybe, and this too, being in a group where people understand what we're going through. No one really fully understands. And people say, oh, there's miracles, there's X, Y, and Z, there's studies. I don't think sometimes people understand. It's better for me to understand what's going to happen at the end than to have this false sense of security. And it's just, it's the siblings. They're taking a bit of a hit. So we're trying to navigate this next. Like I said, he's 24. It is, his abilities are sometimes they go up, then they go down, plateaus, but this one is going down a little bit further, like his abilities. So it's oh, some days, I'll be quite honest, some days I don't think about it because I don't want to think it's going to be okay. And there's some days I'm at work and the tears just, my poor coworker, he's been with me for about 12 years, and he's seen it and he's like, it's going to be okay. And I think it helped when I see his kids playing football, or they're going out on a scooter. I wish he could do that. So I have those moments, but it is definitely having um, a support group of people that understand. And it's different than autism. It's different than Down syndrome. It's different than anything out there. And it's such a small group of people that it just helps to talk and um, not get so mama bear on people, just to learn how to educate. But it's hard.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I think I learned a lot from what you shared there, and it's great to hear that some of this resonated and to hear some of your own experiences of kind of what that looks like for you and your uncertainty in your life. So, and just to share, I think that the concept of the siblings, I think Valerie and I have talked about that a little bit. I think she's also heard that from a number of people. So, you're not alone in that experience either. I think, yeah.
I think also too, they feel a little guilty, that they get to live this life that their brother can't. And they are dealing with it. They do see, I know my oldest sees a therapist, because she also has 4-H syndrome, but it's on a higher level. She just, it's not as aggressive as her brother. So she feels this need of this guilt. So she sees a therapist, I believe, um, once or twice every other month, just so she could talk. But siblings, it does make a big difference.
Yeah, happy to hear if anyone else has any thoughts or things that came up for them from hearing some of these conversations.
If you want to hear from the sort of other side, from the healthcare or science provider, I can just add that, Marion, it was very good that you said, we always try to say this is the uncertainty that we cannot provide answers to your questions that are completely, utterly legitimate questions. We will have to live, we need to live with that. And um, so, yeah, anyway, that was my 3 sentences of contribution.
Yeah. I'll add to, I think, because I have, had the experience of kind of the other side as well, I think that's also one of the most frustrating and devastating parts as well is to have to look at someone in the face who's asking very reasonable questions and to say we don't know and we don't have those answers. I think that's kind of what keeps everyone moving forward with the science end on kind of the research end is because um, I think everyone hates to hear that or have that be the answer. So um, yeah, I think we all wish we had a crystal ball. And I think we can commiserate a little bit in that frustration that imagine you feel with not having
Yeah.
the answers. Yeah, it's Tammy.
I'll add to this from personal experience because um, the decline that we see in Julie has been very gradual, but it's going to happen in this time span between 20 and 30. And we both noticed some more um, just regression and trying to pull words and physical. And the other part of this is that there's nothing you can do about it. And so, as a parent, that's the most frustrating part outside of getting the diagnosis. Once you have that, you want answers, and then you can't do anything about it. Um, just adds to that uncertainty because, as you said in the slides, there's no ending. There's no solution.
Yeah, I think a word I came across a couple of times is like the sense of helplessness. And I think that's likely an emotion that maybe a lot can relate to with this. I think not only is it uncertain, like we don't know, but there's, as you say, there's not much to be done in the sense of uncertainty. That can be a really, challenging thing to overcome. Yeah.
I think one of the things we now have faced, it's the quality of life, and finding every day. And you're right that since he's 24, the decline for us has been, um, it's been great. And uh, it's just, and I hate saying quality of life because I also take care of my mom who has dementia, and that literally is the quality of life for her. And she, but it's different. It's trying to give him the best we can give him. But it is hard. You see it and you do feel helpless. You have a goal as a parent, just to protect, to find solutions, to give them the best care. And then you just don't know what to do.
Anybody else has any questions or things to say? Well, we are almost at the top of the hour. And I just wanted to mention that well, several things. If we wrap it up now, um, as I said, thank you for all of participating. Um, um, we have another seminar next Friday, where Dr. Alison Bradbury will talk about what it means to be in to to find treatments and a cure from the science part. She's a very good speaker on that, and hopefully that's something that you all can participate. And the week after, we have a seminar. I think it's the week after, with Sarah from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, who will talk about the question of siblings, healthy siblings. Anyway, Marion, once again, thank you for talking about that. Thank you for everybody who participated, and I hope I see you soon at the next call. Tommy, did you want to say something too?
Just reiterating what Valerie said, thank you very much. This was really a lot of value. And your research has been very helpful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll close by saying thank you to all of you for participating. Like I said, I think I've learned more from you guys today than vice versa. So I appreciate you sharing your experiences. And it was really lovely to have the opportunity to get to speak with you all.
Thank you, Marion. It was really very, very helpful. And to Tammy and Adele for speaking so eloquently. And I'm telling you, you guys, the mothers and caregivers on this call are outstanding. And this really was a well-needed call. So thank you.